Next, we will move to the value DEF's work has created for administrators, where the tools of decision quality play an important role in helping educators work through complex decisions with increased effectiveness and collaboration. Here are a few clips from some incredible school leaders, starting with Nancy Golden, the former Chief Education Officer of Oregon and a longtime DEF supporter.
But once exploring it and once understanding it, I thought these are skills that leaders really need, that are exactly and the same skills that I needed. So it became really clear that as a superintendent, I could use these skills to help lead the school district I was responsible for leading. So for example, the school boards where a lot of hard decisions were made, either decisions about moving the district forward or decisions related to needing to make budget cuts or whatever the decisions were. It was really important that we made good decisions, and that's what Decision Education Foundation taught us. It certainly taught me, the school board, the staff, and it also was great for our students who we started having classes for on the decision making.
I want to say this is where we want to get to. This is the strategies. I mean, this is what we need to get our kids to. This particular system allows us to make good decisions to build that scaffolding and make sure it's solid. As a systems thinker, we know where we want to be. We build that foundation underneath it. And if we have our staff help us build that with good, sound decision making, then we don't have to sell it. Like I said, the ownership is there. Can you imagine having a common language of how to make good decisions, sound decisions that are not only just for the moment, but they're timeless. And that's how we can justify and use our resources better.
It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Andy Dye, Director of Secondary Instruction at the Eugene 4J School District. Andy is going to share his experience having received DEF training as a member of 4J's district administrative team and the value DEF tools have generated in working some of the key decisions the district has been facing during COVID.
Hi, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I did want to speak, not understate the importance of decision making for students, but it is equally beneficial for adults, especially fellow administrators who have gotten to a position of leadership because we have been making decisions. And I would like to say we've been successful in doing so, but lots of times we've been lucky. We make decisions often that are based on biases or impacts of advocacy, and the outcomes sometimes are good and sometimes are bad. When you get a bunch of us in a room, our flaws when making decisions are amplified. So we recognized as a district that we really didn't know how we made decisions. The most powerful voice in the room often had the final say. And we often found ourselves second guessing the quality of decisions or the process that we went through in the parking lot, so to speak. So we decided to get some training from DEF on how we would make decisions and try to change the culture of how decisions were made, realizing that we had been doing this with students for a number of years, but the adults had not taken the time to learn the same skills. So that was very helpful for us, even though we had some churn in our administrative ranks when it was time to make decisions around how we were going to respond to school closures due to the COVID pandemic. No one needs to be told how disruptive that is or how impactful that is, how absolutely every single part of our organization was affected in a potentially negative way by something over which we had very little control and very little prescience. We don't know how this is going to play out. We have to predict some things. We have to make some decisions on information that may be inadequate. And so we used this to form work groups. Chris mentioned earlier the snake model. And we used that model when working through all of the decisions that were a part of starting up this new school year. People were very nervous based on our experiences from the spring and knew that we did not want the same experience for our students and for our staff, but often found ourselves in these circular conversations where we began solving one problem and then realized hours later that we were actually talking about a very different problem. And so we formed work groups that were comprised of teachers, and a decision-making group that was building administration, central office administration, and our labor association's leadership. And the agreement was that the teachers will be responsible and have the opportunity to develop all of the competing alternatives, and that we were going to choose amongst the most competitive alternatives for how we provided counseling services, how we structured our workday for students, how we structured the workday for teachers, how we made decisions about things that are normally decided through a contract negotiation process, which is not at all generally as collaborative as the decision-making process. In a negotiation, often labor and management have sides. In this situation, there was absolute transparency about what could be done, what should be done, what people wanted the outcomes to be, what they didn't, and truly what the problems were. Everything was out on the table. The process allowed us to frame our problems in a language that everyone converged upon. It allowed there to be this elimination of suspicion that there were resources or ulterior motives that one group or another did not know about. It allowed those who normally don't have a perspective on district-wide operations to see why some things would work and why some things wouldn't work when they appeared initially that they would or should. It wasn't a slow process, but it was deliberate. And in the end, we made what I believe were the best decisions. We didn't get them all right, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a good decision. The quality of the decision was that everyone knew why we pursued a certain angle and knew exactly how to judge the outcome in terms of, was that what we wanted or not? Where did we need to pivot given the information that we used throughout the decision-making process? In the end, I had conversations with union leadership in which they said that that was the most transparent and collaborative process that they had been a part of in their time with union leadership. I wish they were here, but couldn't make it today. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but they said that it was okay that I do so. They appreciated that. As we move into a time where we decide how we go into hybrid learning, that's absolutely what they want and what we want in terms of framing a process for making very complex decisions. We were all able to tell our constituents, the people that approach us, fellow administrators, fellow teachers, community members, why it is that we made decisions that we made, some of which on their surface were not popular at all, some of which did not match what other districts were doing. But in the end, our community understood why we made many of the decisions that we made. And it isn't as though everything went well, but what it did for us is to provide us a context in which to have productive, focused conversations and realize when we were falling into a trap, or realize when we weren't fully engaged in the decision-making process and were instead advocating for something that we thought might be more popular with those to whom we answer. So certainly not trying to necessarily sell anything, but saying that in my professional experience, that this has been the most helpful thing. And it allows me to let go of the myth of owning exclusively the right or responsibility to make a decision, and seeing that my responsibility is to ensure that the process is adhered to and that everybody understands their role and what our goal is as an institution. So thanks a lot. Happy to answer any questions or speak more, but I'll hand it over to Ed Mendelson, who's going to speak to you a bit.
Thank you, Andy. And thank you, Chris, for the invitation. It's great to be here. Really appreciate an opportunity to share my experience with DEF. And, I've used it in a lot of ways. And I use it as a parent. I've used it as a teacher. I've used it as an administrator. I'll focus in on my experience as an administrator when I was a principal at Thurston High School. And I think I met Chris back in 2005, 2006, when they were doing a training with the district that you saw Nancy talk about a little bit earlier. And As a principal, you're making decisions all the time. And you alluded to that as on a district level, but in running a high school, you're making decisions every day. And as a young administrator, I'm not sure that I knew exactly how I came to all those decisions other than some conviction that I thought I held. Racked with biases, I'm sure. But as we embarked on trying a number of different initiatives in our school, a few times we needed to change schedules. And changing a schedule changes every facet of everybody that works there, everybody that goes to school there, everything changes when that happens. And so you have a lot of different points of view as to what is important. And you have a lot of competing values and outcomes. And I think when we could use a process that helped us focus on what are the most important values, what are the most important outcomes, it gave us kind of a North Star by which we could begin then to evaluate our alternatives that we would come up with, that we would hash out. And I think that, and Amy could probably attest to this, that when we went through those times, that the staffs that we worked with, we did this on a number of different occasions. So there was different staffs as the years went on, almost a decade's worth. That transparency is really valuable. That transparency demystifies how decisions get made. You know that if you're in this, you've got a vocabulary to fall back on. You can say, well, is that solution that we're proposing, does that get at our greatest likelihood of figuring out whether or not that's going to deliver the outcomes that we want? And depending on how those outcomes are prioritized, everything else can then be measured against that. So it's like when you're working with a student and you have a rubric and you have this criteria for success. This process kind of builds that into the system. And I think the words that come to mind when I think about using this with staffs is one, it's very deliberate. People can see the path that you're on and where you're going and how you're going to get there. I think it becomes a very collaborative process, right? You can't have creative alternatives unless you have different points of view in the room. It's impossible. And if we're all working on a shared set of values, then even the differences, it becomes us against the differences, not me against you. It's us again about getting to that particular outcome that we want, not your idea versus my idea. And so, we found it very successful. I think, beyond being collaborative and deliberate, it was effective. We got there, and that was, always the most gratifying feeling, to get a staff working in a school that winds up walking away from a big, important decision and people are smiling. People are like, that worked. I didn't see that coming. I remember the first time we changed the schedule. We wanted to have a different schedule than our neighboring high school in our district. And the challenge was, well, if you can get 90% of your staff to agree on it, I guess we'd let you do it. And I think at the time when that challenge was issued, that was a pipe dream. You're not going to get 90% of anybody to agree on anything. And I had a number of teachers tell me that when we embarked on that process. And 92% of us decided, yeah, we should go to trimesters. That was back in the day. But anyhow, and I think that those decisions, because organizations have so many tough decisions to make, and because there are so many competing interests, doing it in the absence of a process is crazy. And it's there are too many traps and pitfalls that we're vulnerable to, not to have something that we can fall back on and something that is really effective. I've also had the chance to teach students these skills, and in a class that we offered over the summer. And what I find fascinating is even if they're, whether they be 14 or 18, this vocabulary and this process is not difficult for students to wrap their head around. Probably the most satisfying use of this process has been with my own children, in trying to figure out things as their lives unfold ahead of them, and knowing how valuable it is to be able to make solid decisions and being able to help them understand that, how this decision turns out isn't necessarily as important as the process that you're going to go through in order to make it. We're always hoping for our best, our most optimal outcome. But if you know why you made the decision, then after you've made it, your ability to commit to it is huge, right? I mean, having lived most of my adult life around high school students, commitment can be a tough thing. That notion of like, well, I thought I liked that. If we front load that and we say, hey, why don't you really think this through? Then when it becomes difficult, or then when it isn't quite going the way you were wishing it would go from the start, students are much more reluctant to throw in the towel. They'll hang in there. They'll work through it. They know why they're on that path. And so whether it be with kids or whether it be at an organizational level, I have found this to be, without question, the most useful professional development I've ever received in my 20 some odd years in education, both as a teacher and as administrator. And on a personal level, probably made me a little bit of a smarter dad. And we can always use help there. So that's been my experience with it. I'm always been, I think, in a debt of gratitude to Chris and to his dad, Carl, for introducing me to this and making it really an effective part of my life. And so now I think I'm getting the high sign. It's time for me to turn over the mic to a man who needs no introduction, Mr. Frank Cook.
Okay, thanks, Ed. And yeah, I'm here at the anchor position, and Chris just basically said, well, fill in the gaps with everything that people missed, and they've done a great job of covering it. So let me give you a little background. I graduated from high school in 1970 and left and said, okay, well, I'm done with that part of my life. So it's ironic that in my 60s, I'm actually back in high school again. I spent 31 years at Chevron, and in 1989 was introduced to the decision chain and the processes, and basically changed my career from geology over to decision making and decision quality, and spent the rest of my life at Chevron helping the leadership of the company improve their decision making skills, and used it a great deal in my business life, and again also in my personal life. And just a quick example of how it helped personal life. We've talked about some of the decisions our kids made, and our daughter, who it's her 37th birthday today. Happy birthday, Kate. A few years ago, had a decision to make. She was between jobs and was trying to decide if she should take a new job as basically a chief operating officer of a clinic, or if she should go to law school. It's a very difficult decision. Both look promising, and she was struggling. It's often hard. I mean, when you have a good alternative, a bad alternative, decision making is pretty easy. Get rid of the dumb one and take the good one. But when you got two good alternatives, it can paralyze you. And she was paralyzed, and she spent a lot of time worrying about it. And she talked extensively to her mother. She talked to her teachers, her brother, her friends, random people on the street. And finally, she says, I guess I have to talk to Dad. And so we sat down and said, okay, so we're going to sit down and talk about this. And she said, well, I have these two choices. I could get my job, or I can go to law school. I said, why do you have to decide? I said, can you do both? I said, can you take the job and try out the job for a couple years? And if you then decide you really don't like the job, go to law school. It turns out that most law schools will give people a couple years to actually commit to coming. And so the miracle decision was, I said, you don't have to decide. I said, you can do both. And so that was very helpful. And she's even come back to me a few times subsequently with other decisions when she's really desperate. But after leaving Chevron and moving from Houston to beautiful Eugene, Chris mentioned this opportunity to work at Thurston High School. And so that's when I said, well, I'm going to go back to high school, and discovered very quickly that working with high school students is far more fun and productive than working with the senior executives that I had been working with at Chevron and then through a little bit of a consulting career. High school kids are fun. They're receptive to learning. They want to try things new. CEOs, not so much. CEOs already believe they know everything. And so I have to spend most of my time helping them unlearn bad habits rather than teaching them. And the kids, they're a little bit more of a blank slate, and they really need to improve their decision-making skills. As a volunteer, I tell them that I can be honest and I'm not paid to be here, so the administration has no influence over me. And I said, decision-making skills is probably the only thing you'll learn in high school that you'll actually use in the future. Amy can vouch for that. But let me just share one story of one student in this college and career class that Amy alluded to, that we taught for a few years. And I can't remember his name. I'm sure Amy can. He was torn between attending college. He wanted to attend college, but he also was interested in going into the military. He wanted to go into the Air Force, and he was interested in aviation mechanics and in particular helicopters. And so again, this decision, what should I do? What should I do? I'm really torn. And we said, well, let's get some more useful information. Let's think and really understand what your choices are. And he started to explore. And that was part of what people did in the classroom. It wasn't just Amy and I'm lecturing, but they would spend classroom time actually researching their options. And he discovered a couple of things. He says, oh, wait, actually the Army flies more helicopters than the Air Force. And at the college, there's an Army ROTC program that I could enter into. And so again, like with my daughter, sometimes the best decision is you don't have to decide, do both. You say, okay, so you can have your military career, you can learn the skills you want, and you can also get your college degree at the same time. And that gave him the clarity. All of a sudden, it just lifted that burden. He's, oh, wait, I can do both. And that clarity that Ben talked about early in the video, it's remarkable when it happens, because all of a sudden they go, oh, that was easy in retrospect. And one of the big things for students, and we found this, is it gives them a sense of power. A lot of these kids, a lot of these high school kids are like little corks floating down the rapids of the Mackenzie River or the Willamette River here in Eugene, Springfield, and they're out of control of their life, and they're bobbing and they're hitting the rocks, and the decision quality gives them the sense to say, okay, you can't control everything, but there are some decisions you can make, and there are some things that you can take control of. We've had a number of students come back and say one of the things they love about our class is that indeed they can win arguments with their parents. You know, they say, I really want to do this. And the parent says, well, no, I don't really think you should. And they go into this argument and pull out the chain. And pretty soon the parent ends up saying, well, that's not what I would have picked, but I guess it's okay. And the kids come back delighted. They say, oh, wait a minute, this is powerful. I can influence my parents. I can get my way. And that's very motivating to these kids. And so it's great fun. DEF gives them all these wonderful tools, and you've heard the story. But the final aspect for me is it's fun for me. It's just fun to get back and help these kids who someday are going to be voting and paying taxes and everything while I'm even older in my old age. And I really want them to make good decisions.
With that, we will end today's Decision Education Foundation event. Thank you to all our speakers and you, the participants, for attending this outstanding event and being with us today. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and we hope to see you again soon in another DEF event. Thank you.